Hello and welcome to the Commander's Quarters, your Magic the Gathering source that helps you command your budget. This show and episodes like this one are possible thanks to viewers like you. If you're looking for an easy way to help support this show, make sure that you like, share, and subscribe. Also, hit that bell notification icon so you don't miss any new episodes. You can also go check out our playmats and other merchandise at thecommandersquarters.com. Another easy way to support this show is with our TCG player affiliate links. So whether you're buying a deck or individual cards, you can use this general link right here or one in the description. And the final way that you can support this show is by supporting us directly by becoming a patron. There are many benefits to being a patron, and I truly couldn't do this without all their support. There's even a brand new Brigadier General tier where you can get a shout out on a Commander's Quarters episode that's dedicated to you. Hey everyone, Mitch coming in for the Commander's Quarters studio. Welcome to the show. Today's episode comes to you courtesy of Charles, who's been supporting this channel as a Golden Pig tier patron. I truly couldn't do this without the support from amazing patrons like Charles, so again, Charles, thank you so much. And for the personalized deck tech, Charles chose Archelos Lagoon Mystic with a focus on tap-untap politics. Archelos is a 2/4 turtle shaman that costs 1 black, green, blue. He has, as long as Archelos Lagoon Mystic is tapped, other permanents enter the battlefield tapped. And conversely, as long as Archelos is untapped, other permanents enter the battlefield untapped. In other words, as I like to say it, Archelos is the Turtle Godfather.
You come to me on the day of my daughter's wedding, and you ask for untapped permanents.
Okay, yeah, that was a terrible Marlon Brando, so my apologies for that. Regardless, Archelos is definitely the godfather of the board, deciding whether things are going to come into play tapped or untapped. For you, yeah, most of the time you're going to want your stuff to come into play untapped, though there are some exceptions and we'll get to those here in a bit. But yeah, your lands coming into play untapped, fantastic, especially for certain lands. But as for your opponents, well, they might have to do you some favors and make some deals with you to ensure that their things are going to come into play untapped. And if not, well, they're going to be slightly hampered by all their things coming into play tapped. Obviously, that means tapped lands for your opponents, which, yeah, would set them back and make them basically a turn slower. That also means tapped artifacts, again like mana rocks that they can't utilize right away, or tapped creatures that they can't use to either block or attack with right away, even if it's got haste. So yeah, with a deck built around Archelos politics, you're going to set yourself up to have plenty of ways to untap and tap Archelos to essentially ensure that whenever you need to, you can either make it so that Archelos is tapped or untapped. So yeah, your opponents are going to have to make some deals with the Godfather. And again, when I'm talking about the Godfather in this context, it's Archelos, not Marlon Brando, who I can't impersonate very well at all. Regardless, this is a very budget-friendly deck with every single card, including the commander, being less than $1. So with all that said, let's jump into it. First up, we've got some cards that can actually either tap or untap Archelos with Tide Force Elemental, Puppeteer, and Niblis of the Breath. Each of them has pay a blue. You may tap or untap another target creature. And on top of that, Tide Force Elemental has landfall. Whenever land enters the battlefield under your control, you may untap Tide Force Elemental. So again, having flexible cards like these that can either untap or tap Archelos can help us out in whatever situation that we need, whether, you know, the opponent has made a deal with us and we untap Archelos, or if they haven't made a deal with us, well, we're going to have to punish them and their things are going to come into play tapped. So we've also got some other ways to do that with things like Retreat to Coral Helm, Disciple of the Ring, and Tidal Force. Retreat to Coral Helm has whenever a land enters the battlefield under your control, choose one. You may tap or untap target creature or scry one. And then Disciple of the Ring has pay 1, exile an instant or sorcery card from your graveyard, choose one. And there are a lot of options, so here we go. Counter target non-creature spell unless its controller pays 2. Disciple of the Ring gets +1/+1 until end of turn. Tap target creature or untap target creature. Again, generally those last two are what we're going to focus on, but yeah, countering spells is not all that bad of a thing as well. And then Tide Force Elemental, well, this one's actually just perfect for Archelos. It does cost 8 mana, but it is a 7/7, and it does say at the beginning of each upkeep you may tap or untap target permanent. So yeah, with this in play, our opponents better be willing to make some deals. And then Aura of Dominion is a fantastic aura in this deck. By paying 1, we can tap an untapped creature we control to untap enchanted creature. Yeah, so basically, hey, 1 mana, just tap Archelos if we want to. While, you know, also untapping another creature that maybe can untap something else. But of course, these aren't the only ways that we have to actually tap Archelos. So we're also going to be running things like Cerulean Caretaker, Loam Dryad, and Sachi, Daughter of Sashiro. Both Cerulean Caretaker and Loam Dryad have tap an untapped creature you control, add 1 mana of any color to your mana pool. And actually, I should probably mention this now, outside of Archelos, we actually have some other creatures that actually want to be tapped too, but we'll get to those here in a bit. Regardless, Sachi, Daughter of Toshiro has shamans you control have tap add green to your mana pool. And again, keep in mind that the Godfather is a turtle shaman, so now we can tap it for mana. Next up, speaking of a creature that actually wants to be tapped, let's talk about Scaretiller. It has, when it becomes tapped, choose one. You may put a land card from your hand onto the battlefield tapped, or return target land card from your graveyard to the battlefield tapped. Yeah, once we're set up properly and have plenty of ways to both tap and untap creatures, this can essentially just get every single land out of our hand in our graveyard into play. I mean, just think about Orb of Dominion on this card. Regardless, we also have some other more standard ways to ramp with things like Search for Tomorrow, Fauna Fertility, Rampant Growth, Explore, Growth Spiral, Scourge Tribe Elder, and Cultivate. But back to our tap cards with things like Cosima, God of the Voyage, Silent Submersible, and Funeral Longboat, which are each vehicles. Okay, well technically Cosima isn't, but the backside is. Because the backside of the Cosima MDFC is the Omen Keel. And like all vehicles, it has a crew cost, and keep in mind that our commander has 2 power, so having vehicles with crew 1 or crew 2 are fantastic for this deck. So whenever we want, we can tap our commander, crew a vehicle, and yeah, have fun with that. The Omen Kill is a great one. It says whenever a vehicle you control deals common damage to a player, that player exiles that many cards from the top of their library. You may play lands from among those cards as long as they remain exiled. And again, we've got quite a few vehicles in this deck because again, we want a lot of ways for our commander to tap, so Silent Submersible can be very impactful as well. When it deals common damage to a player or a planeswalker, we draw a card. And of course, again, like I mentioned before, we've got plenty of ways to tap things. So we definitely have some ways to get Silent Submersible through for some card advantage. And then Funeral Longboat is a bit more simple, a 3/3 vigilant vehicle that's got crew 1. And actually keep in mind, outside of our commander, other creatures that actually want to tap like Scaretiller and other ones I'm going to get to here in a bit, you can actually overcrew a vehicle. You just, keep crewing the vehicle. There's a minimum crew amount, 1 or 2 or whatever, but you can just keep putting whatever creature in the vehicle that you want. So just keep crewing and just keep tapping whatever you need to. Regardless, next up we've got some more vehicles with low crew costs with Skyskiff, Shadowed Caravel, and Daredevil Dragster. Skyskiff is a 2/3 of flying, Shadowed Caravel is a 2/2, and Daredevil Dragster is a 4/4, and basically if we attack or block with it in combat, we get a velocity counter on it, then if it's got 2 of those counters on it, we sacrifice it to draw 2 cards. Regardless, another thing that I should mention about vehicles is that these can actually be fantastic at sticking around for a long time. If an opponent casts a board wipe that destroys all creatures, but our vehicles aren't crewed, well, they're going to stick around, so it's kind of like we've got an army in waiting. And then, yeah, like I mentioned before, we've got plenty of ways to help them get through, so even if our opponents get a few creatures in play, we can probably tap those down and just keep swinging out with vehicles. While also politicking and saying, okay, I won't attack you if you do this for me. Regardless, next up, we've got even more vehicles with Aethersphere Harvester, Mobile Garrison, and Renegade Freighter. Aethersphere Harvester is a 3/5 that we can give lifelink by paying an energy, and it's going to give us 2 when it comes into play. When we attack with Mobile Garrison, we untap another target artifact or creature we control. And again, we've got plenty of creatures that want to untap in this deck as well. And then Renegade Freighter has when it attacks, it gets +1/+1 and gains trample until end of turn. Next up though, our final vehicles are Sleek Schooner, Untethered Express, and Cultivator's Caravan. Sleek Schooner is a simple 4/3, Untethered Express is a 4/4 with trample. Whenever it attacks, we get a +1/+1 counter on it, and Cultivator's Caravan actually is the only vehicle in this deck with a higher crew cost than 2. That being said, it can tap to add 1 mana of any color to our mana pool, and again, if we've got basically any other creature on the board, we can crew this with our commander. But now that we've talked about ways to tap our commander and other creatures, well, what are some ways that we can use to untap them? First up, we've got 3 creatures that can tap to untap another target permanent with Curious Follower, Vizier of Tumbling Sands, and Kelpie Guide. And actually, Kelpie Guide can actually do both tapping and untapping a permanent, but only if we've got 8 or more lands. Regardless, next up we've got Seeker of Skybreak, which can tap to untap target creature, and Norrit, which has a very strange card, but it can tap to untap target blue creature. On top of that, and actually I'm going to read the Oracle text for Norrit on the other ability, tap, choose target non-wall creature the active player has controlled continuously since the beginning of this turn. That creature attacks this turn if able, destroy at the beginning of the next end step. If it didn't attack this turn, activate only before attackers are declared. Basically, this can force a non-new creature to the board to attack, and if it didn't attack, then it goes away. So yeah, if we force it to attack and we tap it down, well, it's going to get destroyed. Regardless, most of the time we're probably just going to use this to untap a blue creature like our commander. That being said, all these tap and untap effects are fantastic, but one card to me in this deck stands above the rest. And that would be the Golden Pig of this deck, which is our number 1 card out of our 99. And the Golden Pig for this deck is Sereth the Viper's Fang. Sereth is a 3/4 human warlock that costs 2 green. She has other tapped creatures you control have Death Touch, and other untapped creatures you control have Hexproof. On top of that, by paying 1, we can tap to untap another target creature or land we control. So Sereth does a ton for this deck. First off, giving our tapped creatures Death Touch makes them a lot harder to block. And actually, again, because we have so many effects that can actually just tap something during combat anyways, we can actually just make our blockers even deadlier too. On top of that, she is a fantastic way to essentially protect our entire board, aside from her, by giving our other untapped creatures hexproof, and again, having plenty of ways to untap those creatures, including Sereth herself. We can essentially protect our entire team. And again, like I just said, you can utilize her to actually untap a creature or again, a land that we control. And we actually have some lands in this deck that can tap for more than 1 mana, so she can kind of be like a form of ramp as well. So yeah, Sereth does a ton for this deck, both in combat and protecting our creatures and untapping things, so yeah, that is why Sereth is the golden pig of this deck. Regardless, now that we've talked about all these awesome cards, how do we actually get to them? First up, let's talk about some creatures that can help us dig through our deck with Painseer, Sphinx's Disciple, and Fallow Sage. Painseer has Inspired. When it becomes untapped, reveal the top card of your library, put that card in your hand, you lose likely that card's converted mana cost. Again, we've got plenty of ways to both tap and untap this, so yeah, just keep getting cards off the top of our library, and most of the cards in this deck have a low converted mana cost. So yeah, drawing cards and losing life, that's okay. We can also draw cards without losing life though with Sphinx's Disciple, which has when it becomes untapped, draw a card. And then Fallow Sage is essentially the exact opposite of that. It has whenever it becomes tapped, you may draw a card. Next up though, we've got some more cards with Inspired with Disciple of Deceit and Arbiter of the Ideal. Disciple of Deceit has when it becomes untapped, you may discard a non-land card. If you do search your library for a card the same converted mana cost as that card, reveal it, put in your hand, then shuffle your library. Basically, transmute a card in your hand when this becomes untapped. So yeah, discard something you don't really need all that much and tutor for something much more relevant. And then Arbiter of the Ideal has, when it becomes untapped, reveal the top card of your library. If it's an artifact, creature, or land, you may put it onto the battlefield, a manifestation counter on it. That permanent is an enchantment addition to its other types. Basically, get things off the top of your library into play for free. Have fun. And of course, next up, let's quickly go through some more straightforward card advantage spells like Painful Truce, Factor Fiction, Epiphany of the Drownyard, Diviner's Portent, and Commander's Insight. Regardless, now that we've talked about some ways to generate card advantage and actually dig through our deck and help out with our plans, let's talk about some ways to throw a wrench into our opponent's plans. So first up, we've got some straightforward removal spells as well as board wipes with Return to Nature, Unravel the Aether, Beast Within, Neverall's Disc, Aether Gale, Displacement Wave, Hex, and Casualties of War. And of course, we're also going to be utilizing some counter spells like Negate, Unwind, and Neutralize. Both Negate and Unwind are going to counter target non-creature spell, and Unwind's going to untap it to 3 lands, and Neutralize can counter any spell, or we can cycle it for 2. Regardless, some of the more spicy things that we can do to throw a wrench to our opponent's plans are things like Daring Thief and King Makar, the Gold Cursed. Daring Thief has, whenever he becomes untapped, you may exchange control of target non-land permanent you control and target permanent opponent controls that shares a card type with it. So yeah, this can have a huge impact on the board, especially when we can tap and untap this thing multiple times in a turn. Speaking of which, King Makar, because, dude, where's Makar? Which, that will never get old. Maybe at some point. Regardless, King Makar is fantastic in this deck too. Because whenever King Makar becomes untapped, you may exile target creature. If you do put a colorless artifact token named Gold onto the battlefield, it has sacrificed this artifact, add 1 mana of any color to your mana pool. Basically, yeah, once we're set up and can tap and untap this, get rid of whatever creatures we want and generate mana while we do so. Your opponents better hope that they're in the good graces of the Godfather when we get this out and when we're set up. Regardless, at a certain point, even if our opponents are in our good graces, the Godfather has got to win. So let's utilize spells like Mass Manipulation to gain control of X target creatures and or planeswalkers, or Villainous Wealth to just cast a ton of things off the top of one of our opponent's libraries. It says target player exiles the top X card to their library. You may cast any number of spells with converted mana cost extra less from among them without paying their mana cost. So, using our opponent's own things against them, yeah, that sounds like fun. Or, we can display Archetype Imagination, and then basically none of our things can be blocked. It says creatures you control have flying, and creatures your opponents control lose flying and can't have or gain flying. So, yeah, unless our opponents have a bunch of reach creatures, our things are unblockable. And again, that includes our vehicle army, which is going to be really hard to deal with. Regardless, now that we've talked about every single non-land card in this deck, let's talk about the price. Like I said at the beginning of this episode, every single card in this deck, including the Commander, is less than $1. So the total estimated cost of this deck is just $27.94. And keep in mind that this cost actually includes the cost of basic lands at 10 cents a piece, so if you already have those lands, well, congratulations, you've got some savings there. And speaking of savings, if you buy this deck on TCG Player and you utilize heavily played and damaged cards, well, there's even more savings with that. Though, do keep in mind that this estimated cost does not include the cost of shipping, which might vary depending upon where you live. And with that, the show is coming to a close, so it's my turn to hear from you. So in the comments below, let me know what your thoughts on this episode are, and as always, thanks again and have a good one.